Welcome to Fantastic Descriptions. I'm Neil Aiken, and this channel is an exploration of the fine art of narrative storytelling as it takes place in the role-playing game. My primary focus is really on description. How do we become better at describing the world? How do we make combats and encounters more engaging? How do we return a sense of wonder and immersion to our players' experience at the table? Going beyond just simply adding props and using maps and other visual effects, what can we do simply with the power of language in our own voice to create an experience that is remarkable, memorable, and potentially even moving? Today we're continuing on with our discussion of rooms and how to make room descriptions more interesting. We've talked about first impressions. We've talked about how to position the room within the larger world and how that sense of its relationship with other things, whether it's in relation to other things on the map or within a level or within a complex, or its relationship within a story or within its historical moment, or across historical moments, or even within sort of a plot or a set of recent encounters. So context has been our most recent discussion. Today's discussion is kind of the meat and potatoes. We're going to talk about what's actually in the room. So I've thought a lot about this and thought about different ways of breaking this down. So we're going to think about really 5 key elements of what might take place within a room, or what we might want to focus on within the room. The first is light, which encompasses both the quality of light in the room as well as the light sources in the room. The second would be fixed elements. So these would be things that are immovable. They might be terrain features. They might be large objects that cannot be moved out of place. But basically they are big pieces that can't be moved. Then you also have movable furniture, which is kind of an all-inclusive category for things that can be picked up and moved. That could be literally furniture, but it could also be anything that it isn't nailed to the ground, could be picked up, maneuvered, manipulated, used in different ways. The fourth is a consideration of elevation, which is when we consider what's in the room, we also consider its positioning vertically and what that might help us do in terms of suggesting opportunities for combat or for strategic placement. And finally, and definitely one of the most important elements is to talk about what might constitute threats or opportunities within the room. In any description, what we should arrive at is something that provides information that leads the players to have to make some sort of choice. What we want to provide an opportunity for players, for the characters really, to have gained new information, to have some sense of where they are, and to be able to make some decisions based on those things. And so threats and opportunities, that's really where things happen, because you want someone to make a decision about what to do with the room and what's in the room. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about light. So obviously, when you step into a room, one of the things in real life, what we notice right away is whether or not there's light. We notice if it's dark, if it's well lit, if there is some change in the color of light. These are things that are fairly immediate. This is part of our initial encounter with the room. And so we would also notice, if it is a particularly dim room, where those sources of light would be. Knowing where light is and the quality of light in the room also provides us something else. It gives us the opportunity to provide contrast. So we might also comment on shadows. We might note where it is dark as well as where it is light. In general, psychologically, when we have something that's well lit, we tend to associate that with clarity, with hope, with a certain amount of safety. We stay to the well lit areas, and this could either be played for as sort of an opportunity to to mislead or to deceive the players or the characters, in the sense that it might seem like a safe place, a well-lit space, but in reality there's something below the surface that they can't see, that this is an illusion. It lulls them into a sense of security. So light, generally we associate with security, with safety, with hope, with clarity. Darkness, on the other hand, we tend to associate with the unknown, with mystery, with threat, but sometimes also with opportunity. So what is out there that we could still discover? What lies at the bottom of the dark pit? So light and dark, and the sources of light within the room. So this might lead us to then describe a room. As you step into the room, it is extraordinarily dark. So dark you cannot see your own hand in front of you. And yet, the longer you stare into the emptiness of the room, you realize it is not actually a void. Off in the distance, maybe about 20, 30 feet away from you, something glimmers. And something like that. Suddenly you create this strong impulse to go in and explore what is that thing that glimmers. So that light and darkness, or something, you can see that the light comes in from one side, and that might draw your attention to a window or to a portal or to a door. But that type of, you don't have to do everything in the room, but you can pick light as your main focus and draw that out. Number 2, we're going to focus on fixed elements within the room. So fixed elements might be as simple as just establishing what the walls look like. So you have walls, you have doors, you have windows, you have other portals or exits. These type of things, architectural features, you might draw attention to as part of your description. So for example, you might have, let's say you push open the door. Before you see a long corridor that stretches out at least 20, 30 feet before it opens up into a much larger chamber. You see off in the distance, flanked by two pillars, a single but very prominently placed throne upon a raised dais. On either side, you see statues of what appear to be military men, soldiers of some sort, but not human, with tentacles where arms would be. So you could play off of certain architectural features. You could make it even more prominent. You could simply say, you push open the door, the room before you is relatively empty, with the exception of a single well placed in the center of the room, fashioned out of stone and what looks to be skulls. So it could be a single architectural element that then draws your attention in. So moving on to movable furniture, number 3, that, as evidenced by the name, could well be just furniture. You could have desks and chairs, you could have tables and beds, you can have bookcases, you could have all sorts of other elements within a room that would be appropriate for that room. If you enter into a library, you expect bookcases. You enter into an armory, you might expect armor racks and weapon racks of some sort. You enter a torture chamber, you expect that there will be various implements of torture lying around. Let's say you enter into a banquet hall, there will be long tables and benches. Maybe there's even a chandelier. So these are obvious elements of furniture and decor. You could go a step further in this consideration of what constitutes movable furniture and include other things that aren't necessarily furniture. They're just movable or interactive elements. So you might have things like, prominently placed on one wall is a large lever. Almost certainly someone is going to pull the lever or push the button. Always happens. You could also have a chest. You could also have an array of weapons scattered on the floor, or you could have like a skeleton which is partly embedded in the wall. Something that kind of jumps out as being, you could probably break it, you could probably pick it up, you could probably do something with it. And the idea is that it should suggest itself as something that is light enough, or at least movable enough, that with enough effort or combination of efforts from the party, you could do something to that thing. It may even suggest to you that you could use it to do something else. So, like for instance, you leave a ladder in the room. You leave, a long pole. You leave. I recently described a particular sewer maintenance area in which there were barrels containing long poles with various implements on the end. So some might have like hooks, and others might have spikes, and others might have other types of blades. And the goal wasn't necessarily for them to use it, but for them to know that there were these really long poles of about 10-foot length that if they had chosen to, they could have taken with them and used them to resolve some other issue later on. And in fact, later on, having forgotten to do that, or not even consider doing that, they might also realize, you know what, this would have been much simpler if we had just simply taken one of those poles. The fact that it exists in the world, the fact that I've given that an opportunity, is a great thing. I don't always know when I plant that in the scene, especially if this is more of an improv description and I throw it in there. I might not know what the end result is, whether or not they will use that or how they will use that. But having planted it into the scene, I now give both the players and myself an opportunity to create a use for that. So maybe I give them these 10-foot long poles and implements, and I don't have a plan right away. And the session ends. The next session, as I'm preparing, I might think ahead and think, they've decided to take a couple of these poles with them. Why don't I create a situation where there is a 10-foot pit, or there is, a gap of some sort, or there's a really wide sort of a cistern or a pool in which they can't interact with it directly without using these long poles. It gives them a sense that they did this for a purpose. There was a value to doing this. Or having not taken it, maybe they become aware that, the things in the world that are being described are actually movable. I can take them out of those spaces and use them. They're not simply part of the background. And so I think about like movable furniture as stuff that might come into play in a combat or in a later sort of puzzle situation. But do include something that is interactive or movable in the scene. Bar fights are full of, you always give people stuff to interact with in a bar fight. And I think that's sort of the one that we're most naturally inclined to do, but other spaces definitely can do that. A good example might be, that they push open the door, they find themselves in the wizard's library, which for the most part has already been ransacked, but there are still books on the shelves, scrolls scattered around, many of them tattered, some of them stained, a few of them charred. Located on the top shelf is a particularly large tome which is chained to the rest of the bookcase. And that might be sort of their trigger to think, why is it still there and what's in it? And it's a large book with a chain. What if we pried it off of the bookcase and then used it as a chain, flail or some sort of a weapon? That might turn into a kind of a fun thing for someone to use in the combat later on. Maybe it's alive. Maybe it's animate and it attacks. So there are different things that you can play off of. But if you give them something to move and to play with, then it usually turns into a fun experience for people. Okay, so let's talk about elevation then. So if we're talking elevation, we're talking really about making certain our description, and this doesn't have to take place in every single scene, but it can help to think about is the room always on the same level? Is it a flat room, or does it have depth and height? So if you have a raised pillar or a block in the center of the room, if you have tables, for instance, that people can climb on top of, or you have bookcases that you can knock over and then stand on top of, that all provides sort of different types of interest. Likewise, if you have enemies that are perched atop a bookcase or on top of, in some sort of a bunker that's located in the room higher up, so they can then fire down on the players, on the characters, then I think that also creates interest. So it's not simply a completely uniform and flat horizontal space that you're playing with, but there's more room. There's more room to your room, right? If there are attacks or threats or opportunities that are something is above you, you can describe what's above you as well as what's beneath you. And I think those things also create opportunities, interesting opportunities. So you might walk into a room, for instance, and find that the floor has partially given way. There's now a large pit that descends maybe 20, 50 feet down. The closer you get to the edge, the more it crumbles, the more unsafe you feel. But at the very bottom, you can hear and barely make out the ripple of water, something moving, and perhaps something glinting in the dark. So little things like that can create an opportunity. There's like, now you're pulling them into the room, but you're also pulling them down into the space. Or you could draw their attention to something higher up. So description can move across, the vertical line as well as across the horizontal line. And paying attention to elements that play off of that verticality can also be of interest. So the final sort of category of things to talk about here would be threats and opportunities. And that's really sort of an all-inclusive thing to include not only sort of the inhabitants of the room, which might be, sort of the NPCs that live there, or monsters, or constructs or guards of some sort. Could be a trap, could be something that's tied to movable furniture or to the fixed elements that then presents itself as like, oh, I wonder what would happen when we interact with that thing. But if you describe, let's say, in the enter room and there is an altar, and beside the altar is a statue with 2 red gems embedded in its eyes. One of them appears to be a little loose, or at least partially coming out. And you have this idea, something that we could interact with that. There's also like money, there's loot we can take away from there, and that might be interesting too. But you've set up a situation where there's an opportunity to get something, hopefully for free, which is never for free. There's always a trap. There's always something, maybe the statue itself is crumbling in some way, and so interacting with it then sets off a trap, or it just is trapped because it is unstable. Maybe something else is precariously balanced. Maybe there is, maybe there are people moving in the room in the dark that you can't see. Maybe there's a ceremony happening, a ritual of some sort that you've interrupted. All these different things present themselves as the opportunity or the threat in the room. So that's from the monsters or the NPCs perspective. That being said, you could also look at, as we talked about at the beginning, you could also look at sort of what are other things that might exist as opportunities. So you might have a prominently placed or maybe a hidden chest, a trap door, a secret door in the room. You might have, there might be like that library of books earlier. The fact that there exists still books there could present an opportunity if you have a wizard or a bard that's interested in gathering information. If there are maps, for instance, people find maps, that can be valuable. So these are all things that present themselves as opportunities. Potentially even a terrain threat. You see that the room, part of the wall has already given way because of the passage of a lava flow through the room. And now you've got a river of lava running through the room. That's clearly a threat. But on the other side, you see, something. Maybe it's the continuation of the passage that you're following. That's where you need to get to. Maybe the bridge that you need to take is rotten, and you can see it falling apart before you. And what you don't see, perhaps, might be the crocodile that lives underneath. So you have threats, and then you have hidden threats. But you also have opportunities and hidden opportunities. In describing these things, I tend to find that describing them as the last thing that you include in that description for the room really sets up the players to make those decisions. Now, you can telegraph this too hard, and people get annoyed by that. But I think, usually if you give them movable furniture and you give them a threat or an opportunity, and then ask them what they're going to do, they understand that these are things they can interact with and do something about. Yeah, so threats and opportunities. So it might simply be monsters or NPCs, or it could be terrain features that are dangerous, anything that presents a danger, or anything that presents the possibility for further, further treasure or further knowledge, or just improved opportunity to move something else, to move forward with the plot. And like I said at the beginning, the goal isn't necessarily to include every single one of these things in your description, but it's to consider these as sort of tools for the trade of describing things. Next time you go into a room or describe a room, think about, what is light doing in this room? Or I can think about elevation. I can think about have I included an opportunity or a threat in the room? It's not that every room needs a monster. It's that there needs to be something to do or interact with. Or maybe it's simply to say, like, if this is an unimportant room, I don't need to belabor the point that it's unimportant. I just simply need to move on. And so there are going to be some rooms in which there's no threat or opportunity. The only opportunity is really that you could take shelter here, or that you could close the door. So I would consider all these different things as being valuable, but figure out how you're going to do it, and just have fun. So if you like this, please like this video and subscribe, and check back often. There's new content, usually every week, sometimes a little bit more often. And let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see or hear on this channel. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and roll dice and have some fun with your friends. Even if it's virtual, we're all in this together, and enjoy sort of the ability to kind of make a world come alive just through language. And good luck. Enjoy describing the worlds that you inhabit and the worlds that your players and your characters inhabit as well. Until next time, bye.